our Finding Clarity in Complexity series. I'm Sally Johansson and will be supporting you during this webinar. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default. Please do open your webcams so that we can all see each other. As with the previous webinars in this series, Geoff will be using the breakout rooms, so please be ready to interact with your microphone and camera. This webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a copy of the recording, slides and resources for today's session in the next couple of days. As we use MailChimp for bulk emailing, sometimes emails land in spam or junk, so please do check your spam if you don't receive it, just in case the email has landed there. We'd like this session to be as interactive as possible and invite you to submit your text questions in the chat box throughout the webinar. You'll find this by hovering over your screen, and a small taskbar will be revealed at the bottom. Please write your name and location in the question pane now so that we know the technology is working for you. It's now my pleasure to introduce your facilitator, Miranda Dockier, AC, Head of Digital Learning, Events and Conferences.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our fourth session in this series, and actually it's the last one, so enjoy it. Hi Geoff, good evening to you. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks Miranda. It's lovely to see everybody coming in.
Yes, so hello everyone, thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you again with us and to see you all. I hope you can switch on your camera so we can see you. I hope that this session will be as interactive as the former ones, and you'll be enjoying interesting chats and especially Geoff's presentation. So we'll be here to monitor your questions and see if everything is going well, and I'll hand on to Geoff now.
Good, thank you very much, Miranda, and welcome everybody. It's been fun with time zones. I think I've been just in Australia in 2 different time zones, and I understand that you've just shifted as well. So it's good that you're here, and I think possibly there's a few people that are not here that may be a little bit out of sync with our shifting time. And I think, as I've said, a couple of the lectures or a couple of the webinars, that getting used to this kind of format and shifts and cross-border conversation is quite important in working in the new, I guess, environment of organizational life, where we're coaching across with groups, virtual groups, and using different kinds of technologies and challenges. And it does add a degree of complexity simply in the interface that we're using. So please interact, please put the questions in as I talk. And tonight we're going to have a look at the experiment and execute part of eFIRE and give a little bit more attention to the idea of the mindset over the methodology. And last time I spoke and talked a bit more about you have a copy of the questions that go into the frame of eFIRE, and I will just touch in on those briefly just to get us started. I'm calling tonight Experiment and Execute, which is the final kind of piece of the eFIRE model, and taking a paradoxical view. And I've mentioned this a little bit in the. By the way, could you put your microphones on mute? I think, Nadine, if you could mute the microphone. It seems a little bit of, it picks up quite easily. So I'll just switch on to the slide briefly. Hopefully you're seeing the slides. I think you are. That tonight, a quick review of the mindset and the method, and to touch on coaching cultures, because I asked you to have a bit of a play with an app, and I'm not sure, or an instrument. I'm not sure if anybody did, but if you did and you got a little bit of feedback from that, by all means put in some comments in the chat room, and we'll pick pick up on that. But also, and considering, what I really want to do is considering inherent tensions within the mindset of using an eFIRE coaching model as a leader in an organization, and also us as coaches working with leaders, is to be very conscious of what are the tensions and conflicts that are happening within the individual, the team. We've talked about coaching cultures operating at different levels. Really being very, very sensitive to what are some of the tensions that are going on. And I'll explain more about this in a minute. And talking about even within the idea of, if you look at the model of eFIRE, if you look on the left there, to experiment and execute for maximum impact through intentional action, there's even an inherent tension between the idea of experimentation, which is around play, while on the other hand, being very intentional about the action that you're taking. So you've got already within the model itself, this idea that there is a need for very definite action, while we also know that that definite action may not get the results you wanted. So we're looking at the model, it's a fluid model, one that moves, that we don't have to end in experimentation of execution. We might actually start by experimenting with something to see what happens to make a difference in the systems that we're attempting to influence. But maybe if you would mind just putting some, let's bring up that chat room. If you have any questions, any comments that you'd like to make early on, just some reflections that you've had, or even if you'd like to unmute your microphone and come in, please feel free to do that. So you remember last time when we spoke, I mentioned again the essence of the idea of Einstein's idea of groping or probing as a leader in trying to find out what are some of the strategies that we can find for effect. So when I'm coaching someone, again, we're going for intentional action and we're going for execution, but at the same time, we're being fairly aware that we're in the dark to some degree because of the nature of complex organizations in which we work. So we've got to be very careful about overplaying the certainty of our own execution. So there's I'll say a little bit more about this, about the mindset that we carry as coaches and as managers. So we've got being reflective, of being curious about where these tensions hold, and also to be particularly open to the possibility that in this multiple perspective environment, that there are a number of truths that are surfacing and playing. And being pragmatic, to be prepared to go one way, and then if needs be, to go another. So this, and also to hold those 2 or 3 or 4 approaches as being equally valid until we get energy around the ones that seem to be offering us the most in terms of the influence that we're trying to make. So this is where we come back to the energy in the center of the eFIRE model, that we're probing, we're groping, we're seeking to find in our execution and our experimentation of where, in complexity theory, we talk about strange attractors. Where does the energy seem to be going? And we can go with it in order to make a difference. And we're also of ethical, of being mindful of doing the right thing. But of course, as we know, what the right thing is in itself a question, and all of the eFIRE model, I've been embedding ethical questions within it, because different people have different views of what is right and what is wrong. And you remember, I think last time, the perspective that we know that even in organizations where there are lots of things happening in different change approaches, in our university, we've got a massive interrelated change processes that are going on. And people seem to do things that other people look at. And I had a coaching client today who's a very senior university administrator. And he said, there is someone trying to sabotage me. And I said, all right, well, what might that person be motivated by? And the answer was, I've no idea. So we talked about the idea that from the perspective of the person who seemed to be doing stuff that had no purpose, there seemed to be there must be some purpose. It must make sense from the point of view of the person who is behaving in that way, even though from the point of view of all these other people that he was talking about that were becoming frustrated, from that person's point of view, there must be something happening that makes sense. So this is again, the tension within the system. And, looking at what makes this more problematic and more interesting is that you do have the individual, you've got the group and the team, and you've got the organizational interaction that's going. And eFIRE encourages inquiry at multiple levels, sort of up and down and across the system. So all the time, when you're in the mode and the model of the eFIRE coaching model, you're teasing people to be firstly aware of what level of the system are you looking at. Are you looking at the individual? But even when you are, to be also mindful of the next level out. So you've got multiple levels interacting, but also we talk about being at the level of the system in focus. So you're not getting muddled. You know where the lens is focused. At the same time, you're conscious that there are other lenses that are relevant to the lens that you're looking at. So you've got this coming in, going out, a bit like the zoom on a camera. And so we saw, if some of you had a play with this app or this instrument, some of the questions in there are looking at the way, when you're coaching in an organization and working with leaders who are coaching, of being mindful of where these organizations are in terms of their own development and how well positioned are people to have the conversations at a sophisticated level. Because if you're looking at that, you get some scores when you start to use this instrument. If you find that the system in focus that you're looking at is at a quite nascent or early development level, you're going to find having conversations about tensions and paradox very difficult to do. So as a coach, and in encouraging leaders to coach, of being very aware of the level of sophistication and the level of development within the organization as to how much they are able to engage with this conversation, the internal conversations. Once you get a sense that you're dealing with a fairly sophisticated organization, then of course these conversations tend to flow much more easily. So part of the job of the coach in working with managers and encouraging them to have coaching conversations is to be constantly mindful of the nature of the culture within which they're operating, so that they're not getting out of sync as they develop with their more sophisticated conversations. So eFIRE encourages, and this is part of being open in this, the idea of growth, but being open to possibility and being open to different ways of looking at it. And if you look at some and listen to the language of many people who are in the business of change management, there's this belief, assumption that they have the answer that other people need to understand in order for the organization to grow. This is countercultural to an eFIRE approach. The eFIRE approach is, well, there are various approaches. The change model that's being implemented is going to interact with the different approaches, and the change model itself, the change process itself, needs to be very adaptive and very conscious that it can't simply roll out on top of people. And you hear things like, oh, well, that group doesn't get it yet, but we'll fix them. Now, this idea of change model, it's a very, very nice cat, Marianne, by the way. And the whole idea of change as being a much more interactive process rather than one that is being done to people. So that is really in eFIRE, we're looking at the idea of tensions, and even a very simple tension that organizations are places where people grow. They're also where people are at risk of losing their own identity and their own way of being. So we come with our hopes and our fears to organizational processes, and the more that we get into complexity, the more fear overcomes hope. So this is where An eFIRE model using positive psychology is constantly looking for possibility and endeavoring not to close people down. At the end, you know, that very, very nature, even in this conversation tonight, we come to it to learn and to grow, but we fear by stepping into the conversation that we may lose something by way of our knowledge, our face, some element of our identity is at risk if we step in inappropriately into a conversation. At the organizational level, one of the really critical points of paradoxical life in organizations now, more so than in the past, is this idea of the ambidextrous organization, that on the one hand, an organization needs to exploit the current situation to make a buck. On the other hand, it knows that it needs to destroy what makes it successful in order to grow. So you've got this constant tension between growth and making profit, which, if it's not well understood and well managed, can become a problem rather than a generative opportunity. So this is again, this is really one, when you're working with leaders, this is one that will inevitably surface in any organization almost at the moment. There's very few that are immune to this fundamental paradox. So I'd like to pause and ask you to think a little bit about what are some of the paradoxes, some of the tensions that are at play in some of the situations in which you're finding yourself. I'll give you a good example. In our organization, one of the tensions is between the independence and purity of academic research in the university and the need for us to increasingly be commercializing what we do in order to be successful in the absence of government funding. So what you've got there is a tension between people who think, well, you know, I should be independent as a professor or a researcher, leave me alone, let me get on with my work, find the funding, you do that and I'll do my academic research and be successful in that way through publications. And on the other hand, people say, well, that's all very well, but you're not going to get anywhere. We can't even employ you unless you engage with the business of the business and guide your research so that it draws in commercial funding. So you've got a very, very strong paradoxical position. Add another tension there between teaching and research. So you've got another paradox between people who think that their job is to give learning to the students at the university who pay fees, and others who think that their job is to do purity of research in order to sustain the knowledge growth in the university. So you've got these inherent tensions, and they can be worked together. They can be worked together, and this is what we'll explore a little bit in a minute. So what I'm going to do is to invite you to go into, come on, you can do this, into some breakout rooms, and we've got 24 participants. I'll put you in 8 rooms, and just for, it's now, let's have a look at our time. I'll give you about 7 minutes to just think about what's the organizational life that you're in at the moment and where are some of those tensions. So have a conversation, see if you can surface where some of those might be. Where are some of the underlying tensions in the nature of the organization that you're in? And if you're not in an organization now, obviously if you're a coach, it might be that you're working by yourself, but you'll be working with clients. Maybe have a discussion there. So I'm going to set those up. All you have to do is to invite the, simply answer, when it invites, simply say yes to the invitation. 3 6s are 18, that should work. So I'll open all the rooms and you'll find yourself in a room. So we have Sally and Smiranda here. Hello, Sally and Smiranda. And hello, Nadine. Here we go. Tula, are you there? Hello, Tula. Nadine. If you want to unmute Nadine, you can come in, and same with you, Tula, if you want to come in and chat in here. And there's Roger. Hello, Roger.
be 4 payments before summer. O, bufnița, fii atent la bufniță, ce simpatică e. Fii atent ce simpatică e bufnița.
Okay, we should get everybody back in a minute. A bit of luck, here they come. It's a lot of cats tonight, it's nice. Okay, welcome back. Would anybody like to share a few thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, would anyone like to unmute and just have a little chat around that? We've got everybody on the screen there. Anybody come up with something interesting? Just go and unmute and please just make a comment.
Jeff, I found myself thinking about a couple of local authorities that I work with, local councils then. And there is a great tension within there of providing quality of care to people within the social care system and the ever tightening squeeze financially. And I think that's felt at the top of the organisations, and therefore there's a lot of imposed targets as well. And I think really probably that to a large extent is maybe middle managers who feel themselves in most of a sandwich around, on the one hand, you know, we want to deliver the best care we can. On the other hand, it's all limited in terms of what can be done.
That's really good, Paul. I mean, this is, and what happens in these tensions, and I'm sure in each of your conversations there'll be different variations of that, is that people, if it's not managed well by the leader, if the leaders don't understand it or they want to sort of line up with one or the other, is that people very easily polarize, and you get these camps that are fighting the good fight with all their might. And it becomes increasingly toxic. So they're really, the assumption behind the coaching approach is that these camps and this polarization is not helpful. The leader's role is to validate the points of view of each of the people involved and to seek ways of synergizing between the two so that people are constantly looking at, well, okay, our job is to maximize quality, but does that mean we need to be constantly, does that mean that we can't also be very mindful of value for money? I mean, if value for money is seen as in conflict with quality, then inevitably people will line up between the ones that they tend to be more favorable towards. Whereas, you know, the very smart, I remember talking to a health professional who was running a district health centre in Australia, a regional health centre. I said, it must be difficult not having enough money. And he said, that's not the issue. The money's not the issue. It's the way we use it. So it would have been very easy for him to go straight into that, oh yeah, we need more money routine. But in fact, he realised it wasn't about that. It was about the, you know, sure, there may be resource shortages and we have to be careful, but we've got to be looking at how can we maximise quality with what we've got. So this is a classic tension. Anybody else like to make a comment before I'm conscious?
Hi, Jeff. David here. Really just an observation about there are tensions which you're commenting on around in the organisation itself and the wider organisation, but obviously a lot of paradoxes and tensions within individuals as well. And sometimes actually exploring the dynamic between those two is a key sort of challenge in coaching, I think.
Yeah,
so we touched on this a bit in our chat room in terms of, for example, people who see themselves wholly at the centre of the problem and don't look at the broader system versus, looking at the broader system and where the problem lies elsewhere as well.
That's very much this idea, David, we talked about at the start around a cultural and systemic view that looks at the individual in the context of the team, in the context of the department, in the context of the organisation, and that this, there's, I don't know whether it was Drucker, but one of the sayings around the behaviour of the individual is overwhelmingly a product of the system, and it doesn't abrogate people from responsibility, but it makes us think much more carefully about the way in which we blame people. And this is this is from the humanists here. This is a quote from Carl Rogers. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This is meeting people where they are in order to generate change. There's another, Socrates, the only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. And in organizations, it's this paradox between valuing what you do know while knowing what you know is extremely limited and is probably wrong tomorrow anyway, and being quite comfortable with that idea instead of locking ourselves into set positions. I'll just keep an eye on the chat room. This is quite fun, this multitasking. Okay, all right. So yeah, at the individual level this operates, and at the organizational level it becomes increasingly more interesting. This is an interesting viewpoint that Guy writer. Confusion is not a bad thing. It's not doubt that makes a man mad, it's certainty. So the danger in organizations is not that people say, well, I don't really know. It's they say, well, I do know, and you're all wrong. And this is the interesting thing. I mean, how can we be certain as leaders and even as coaches in the positions that we take? How can we provide certainty while at the same time knowing that certainty is going to get into a lot of trouble if we then lock people into particular positions? So you've got this constant individual and group and organizational tension between needing to move and needing to take action. So you've got in that bit of tonight, we're talking about experimentation and execution. You've got that constant balance between play and not being sure, groping, probing, and needing to take action that will achieve results. And this is in itself an interesting dilemma, but a fun one if you can get people to embrace the idea that it's not really the end of the world if you're not 100% sure. So being openness to tension, having openness is one of the kind of mindsets of eFIRE, of opposition, polarities and conflict are part of the DNA. This is two writers, Smith and Burt, in a book. There's a reference at the end around the paradoxes of group life, that when a conflict surfaces as a problem, their principle is it's not treated as something that should be removed. So in fact, what we do is we treat, and this is in the context of research as well, we treat conflicting observations, when you notice these polarities and you notice these paradoxes, you just see them as that. They're conflicting observations, and don't resort to deciding what's right or wrong or accurate or distorted. So you're not judging, you're being open to what's there and observing it and being curious and noticing and working with it. Some paradoxical positions that I find very useful when I'm coaching. One is this idea of taking a position of skeptical optimism, that anything I'm presented with, I'm optimistic that there's opportunity in it, while at the same time, I'm skeptical about its inherent truth. So you've got a neat tension in there between that. and one that I guess many of you would have been familiar with already is this idea of comfort with discomfort, that we're asking people, when we're coaching people and when leaders are coaching people, they've got to be prepared to encourage people into this space of discomfort and not to be terribly overly protective of people. Well, it's a paradox in itself. We've got to be fully protective in providing a safe space while at the same time making people uncomfortable. So this is really tricky. And yeah, managers need to be comfortable in their ability to encourage discomfort is a great comment from Karen. Yeah, the managers themselves, they have to hold this edge in the conversation. And I quite like, you can go with tentative assertiveness or assertive tentativeness. You can go either way on that. I'm very sure and assertive about my position that there are a number of ways of doing this. So I'm very assertive, but I'm also tentative about the way that I do it. Or I'm going to, the tentative assertive is slightly different. I take a position as a coach of being tentative about being assertive. I might say, well, look, I'm going to take a strong position here, but I'm going to be a little bit careful about the way I do it. But I think here, one thing that looks certain is this, but I'm a little bit careful about how I position it. So you've got, again, taking in the conversation, something that's a little bit difficult. So a lot of things coming in on the chat here, which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So this is Bertrand Russell, an interesting one. All exact science is based on the idea of approximation. So again, you've got straight away, if a man tells you he knows a thing exactly, then you can be safe in inferring that you're speaking to an inexact man. So there's this interesting questioning going on here. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago, which is by Tony Schwartz. I don't know if anybody knows the work of Tony Schwartz. He writes around energy. And when he went into Sony Pictures, they were short of energy because they were very much at the time a technology computing company in generating computers through technology, movies through technology. And what he did was looked at ways in which they were trying in the global financial crisis to do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, do less with more. So more with less. So what he said, well, let's have a look at an energy perspective, grow the energy in the company through working in, and he talks, there's a really good article that he's written in this about managing your time, managing your energy and not your time. You can't do anything about time. Time is what time is. But what you can do is manage your energy. So he applied this to the principle of Sony and deliberately got people to do less in order to achieve more, which is a very simple paradoxical position. So he was growing the energy in the company, which then enabled people to be more productive by doing less, which is straight away contrary in a time of the global financial crisis. And this was something that was very, very difficult to take. But he did have a success. I'm not sure about the history of Sony Pictures since then, but these things do have a shelf life. But it had its most profitable year in 2008 and again reached record levels in 2009. So he was moving the technology versus striving harder for more in the technological world through pulling back and achieving more through relaxation. Thank you. Yeah, ambidexterity. If you try and write something with your left hand, or if you're left-handed, then you write with your right hand or vice versa, and try and cite your name or whatever it is, it's very uncomfortable. So in any of these situations, we're likely to have a dominant hand. So if we're in favor of, for example, the status quo, if that's where our smoothness of script is likely to be the best. So we have to get used to writing with the other hand, or at least to to be very friendly with people that do write with the other hand, so that you've got to be able to work with people in a time where it's discomfort. Just watching the chat come in. Yeah. Again, if you take this kind of A versus B with a negative, positive, or trying to balance things, of trying one over the other, it's something of a deficit game. In order for me to be more successful, or in order for me to be more effective, you need to be less effective. It's in some respects, this has been played for ages about a win-win, that what you're looking to do is grow the energy in the situation by leveraging the tension between the two. If you can get people excited about the tension, then there's an opportunity to get something happening that nobody was expecting before. And this is where we get to this idea of emergence, where in an organizational system, we get different kinds of things happening. I'm going to flick, I wonder if I did, hang on. No, it's not there, hang on. All right, we'll keep going. So just some of the different images that are familiar with energy, of different, and of paradox, of instead of lining things up in neat boxes, of putting them in associations that encourage different ways of thinking. And you remember that in the last week or two, I talked a lot about pictorial representations. And I've got my box of images. I've got to carry a box of postcards of different images that are presenting to people, of trying to look at things in different ways and to take different perspectives. So the eFIRE model is constantly throwing up different approaches, different metaphors, different, there's some work, a number of academics and a number of practitioners talk about leadership in terms of metaphor. Mats Alvesson, the Swedish critical academic, it has some very, very interesting metaphors for leadership. The gardener, the knight, and also even the metaphor of the bully, of looking at the way in which managers and leaders and even coaches can get into inadvertently drop into a position of bullying the other person, intimidating in some way through intellect or through expression. So there's a lot of movement that's possible if you're prepared to step away from linearity and directness in this space. Maybe if I pause a little, would anybody like to make a comment at this stage? What are you thinking? What's some thoughts that you might like to share? Anybody? Okay. So we're into just discussions and questions, but also what I want to do is ask you a little bit of a test here. I've got a few of these questions here. I want you to have a look at this and to put in the chat room, which of those, you can put this in, I guess you can put them all in order of what you think is rightness. And the question is this: in using eFIRE, the person doing the coaching accepts that in complex and messy situations, there are multiple perspectives. Associated with this belief, the coach will take a general position that, firstly, nothing is right or wrong, or B, the views of all the parties are equally important and valid. Different stakeholders come with different ideas, cultures, etc., that need to be understood. To understand a complex situation sufficiently to affect positive change, it's necessary to talk to everyone involved, and everyone's point of view is true from the perspective of holding it. So in the spirit of eFIRE, instead of saying which of those 5 is right, I might ask you to put in the chat room, which do you think is more right than others? Which of those to you is the most attractive as being the one that seems to offer, from what you've heard in the webinars so far, which one seems to you to offer the most possibility? And if you want to put a little reason why, so just type it in the chat room. No, some of these are. All right. Yeah. None of them seems to move to intention. Oh, somebody's putting in an option F. That's good point, Roger. No, not at all. No. What we're doing here is throwing up some different perspectives of even the model here. And, you know, sometimes the model might not work. What I did do was, if I was running this as a multiple choice questionnaire, what I've done is graded this in terms of what I think are the most complete in terms of the inspiration of eFIRE as the generator of it. Now, the interesting things about that is I've forgotten what I'd put as the answers. So, and it might be that my answers today are different than my answers when I wrote it. So, okay. Yeah, all right. The perspective, where are you looking at this? Okay. The point from Trish is curious about the viewpoint of the outsider, coach consultant, which can be different from those in the system. Yes, and often we both have a power in terms of our organisational position as an outsider, but we also don't have the knowledge of the insider. So there's a dual thing going on about who might be more right than others. What I generally think, I think what I suggested is C is probably the most helpful in some respects, but also E is of value. And sometimes I'm not sure when I start to slip into some of the others, the views of all parties are equally important and valid is interesting, but then that may not be the case if you're focusing on a particular issue, but there might be. So this is where we're nothing is right or wrong. Well, occasionally things might be wrong or not. You know, factually they might. So you know, the idea of this kind of approach is not to put up rigid solutions to even these sorts of problems. I'll give you just one more to play with. This one's this leader-coach idea, which I think is critical. I'll let you read that. I think everybody should be able to read that okay, I think. The first one's about influencing. Second one's strategy. The third one is a temporal view. The first one's about respect. And the other one is a bit of a suggestion that the leader's coach job is not to give directions. So have a bit of a go. What do you think? Which one holds to you the most truth? Maybe, and a little comment as to why that might be. If the most truth even makes sense there. We've got to make a call here. We've got to make a call. Yeah. As valid as the leaders expect to share the overall objectives line people. Yeah. That's good. Ah, yes. Other thoughts? He seems to resonate with engagement, yes. Yep. Yeah, I think most of these, what you've got in there is you can find exceptions to most of these situations where, all right, the B's getting a lot of popularity there. Yeah, you know, I think when I put the weighting, I think I put B, not to say that that's right, but B tended to be the one that has, it's the least, or the most difficult to disagree with. The first position of the leader coaches is to look at their delegated and role responsibilities in the process. But then again, so I guess at a broader systemic level, that's true. And the other ones are true as well. The D is important. And yeah, I'm interested, David, that you mentioned that D, if it's a coaching conversation, well, there's the eFIRE model would suggest that the mindset means that all conversations, even when you're directing someone, can be a coaching conversation. And it's a point that I think some people disagree with. I think if I'm directing you to do something, but I'm also being respectful, I'm also being very mindful of the context of which we're in, and being very mindful of the impact and consequences of what's going to happen from that direction, and I'm interested in your response to it, maybe not in the moment, but at a later point. To me, that's very consistent with a coaching mindset, and not at all. We get taught as coaches that our job is not to tell people what to do. As a leader coach, I think you can still be in a coaching role and tell someone what to do, and even shut them down, I think. But of course, this is how you're shaping your definitions. Some interesting points coming in here. Yeah. But I really want you, if you can, to, when you're thinking eFIRE, is to think about what would it be like if the people that you were coaching were using an approach like this. So it's not simply a mechanism for us as coaches to coach other people, but is this a position that managers can take when they're working in these complex situations? And it's quite an important one. What I'm going to do is, there's one about, just going to push this one here. Just going to finish with one more. Have a look at 8, which is an assumption. If you've got, I'll just blow that up slightly more. Just to finish, this idea of emergence. What does emergence mean? I think if you're looking at coaching and you're looking at eFIRE and complexity, I think capturing this idea of emergence is critical. So have a look at some of the options there, just as a final bite in the last few minutes, about what do we mean by knowledge and growth being emergent. Thanks, Majid. Thank you. Any thoughts there? Just have a last go. I'm quite attracted to C, actually, the idea of everything's a mystery. There's a bit of energy going in on D, aren't they? Another D, yeah. Both development knowledge will occur in their own time through the interaction of conversation, reflection, exploration, and action in and around the relevant systems. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah. trust the process, yes, that's D and D are probably pretty close in some respects, aren't they? Yeah. So I'll just bring it back into our group. So really that's, I think that those questions hopefully give you a sense of the nature of eFIRE and the nature of the conversations here. That as a coach, being very careful about a position we take, but as much as possible encouraging the leaders that we work with to take a much more fluid approach to what they're doing and avoiding lining up on one or other, or the many sides that they can take in organizational sort of agendas, and instead to look for those opportunities to synergize and to work fluidly within organizational tensions that cannot be solved. They cannot be solved. The idea of a complex problem is one that doesn't have a full resolution. What it has is a potential for positive influence. And the E in energy center of eFIRE is where this idea of positive influence is discussed. What are the values of the organization and the people in it? What really matters? What is important? How do people determine what is a positive influence when they're working with the system? And how can people act in ways that can align what they do with each other? Okay, so I think that is pretty much to the end of our hour, but I would invite a question or two if you have one at the end there. Very happy to take a question or two. Okay, well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all, and we've been moved. I think webinar 5 would be even more interesting. So thank you very much for your engagement, and feel free to email me. And we're at the moment in the middle of our executive graduate certificate at QUT, where a lot of this material is taken to more depth and aligned with projects, and people are coached, and we work with organizations to embed some of this in the way that people operate. So it is more than a model. I guess that's the last thing I'd like to say. So thank you very much for your engagement. Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Smaranda, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Geoffrey.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoff. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. It was a very interesting series. I think everyone agrees, and we'll look forward to having you again in the future.
I like that very much. Thank you very much, Miranda. Thank you.
Could I just add one thing? We would, as we haven't been able to do a survey automatically like we usually do, we will be sending out a short survey to you all for your feedback about the series, which we'd really appreciate your completing. Thank you very much.